There are aspects of my personality that I can't control.
See a shrink?
It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Bruce, trust me when I tell you, I've heard them all.
Not this one.
We've never seen anything even close to your levels of exposure. That you survived an event like that, it's beyond my comprehension.
I don't want to control it. I want to get rid of it.
As far as I'm concerned, that man's whole body is property of the U.S. Army.
They want it as a weapon. If we let it go, we will never get it back.
What was that?
There's only one thing that can fight that. It's in me.
Maybe if I can control it, I can use it.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody, where we love talking about movies and more. I'm your host, Mason Phillips, and today I've got a review for you for The Incredible Hulk, the second movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before we go any further in this video, I want to ask you to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. Now, let's talk about the plot. Scientist Bruce Banner scours the planet for an antidote to the unbridled force of rage within him, the Hulk. But when the military masterminds who dream of exploiting his powers force him back into civilization, he finds himself coming face to face with a new deadly foe. All right, so what was good about The Incredible Hulk? This is a movie that does not get talked about enough, specifically because it stars Edward Norton as Bruce Banner and not Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner, who took over as the character in The Avengers. So there was some falling out between Edward Norton and the studio. He wasn't the easiest person to work with. He was doing some behind-the-scenes editing, kind of going around the director and the writers and the creators of this film, wanting to kind of put his own spin on the writing. He did a little bit of writing on this film to punch up the script a little bit. He even has a fake name credited in the film instead of as Edward Norton. He's credited as somebody else for his writing credit. It's so weird what happened there. He just had his own idea for how he thought the character should go, and Marvel Studios had their own idea for how the character should go. And I'm giving Edward Norton the benefit of the doubt here because I think he wanted more so to focus on the character on his own and not so much in the cinematic universe. And it was early stages MCU. So I think at the time they were like, okay, we'll kind of let him do what he wants to do with this movie. However, he did kind of step on some toes. He went around the director, he went around the studio, he went around a lot of people that he shouldn't have, and probably angered a lot of people that he shouldn't have in making this movie, and made some decisions that really weren't up to him. But he was thinking more of the Incredible Hulk franchise, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise. That is an issue, I think, with the Cinematic Universe format, in that some of these films can't really stand on their own. But because of the nature of what happened with this movie, we have never gotten a sequel to the Incredible Hulk. This movie almost feels separated from the MCU because of its early days nature, only being the second movie in the MCU, the second movie in phase 1. This movie came out 1 month after Iron Man came out, which was also really weird. Now, it was distributed by Universal and not by Paramount, who was distributing the movies at the time before Disney bought Marvel Studios. So this was pre-Disney to Marvel Studios. They were their own independent studio at the time. And so I think it was that Universal probably just didn't care, and they didn't have that structuring that Disney would then provide and mandate for these MCU films going forward. It was a time when Kevin Kevin Feige didn't have complete control of Marvel Studios. Yes, he was the president, but he still had other people he had to answer to, like Avi Arad was still in charge of him in some aspects, and you had Ike Perlmutter who was running everything at the time too that Kevin Feige had to answer to. Again, this was also pre-Disney, so there was a lot of stuff happening. I also believe that Mark Ruffalo, who did get the part in the Avengers, Louis Leterrier, the director of The Incredible Hulk, who I don't think gets enough credit for how well he was able to manage this film with all the troubled production it had. He wanted Mark Ruffalo to be the Hulk initially, but Universal thought that they should have a more well-known actor in the role, and so they went with Edward Norton instead. I will say between the two, Mark Ruffalo provides his own take on the character, Edward Norton provides his own take on the character as well, and I really like what Edward Norton's going for here in that quiet reserve, trying to keep the anger down. Like there's always something bubbling under the surface, so he's trying to keep this monster at bay. And although this movie's very separated, you can kind of see where this will link into the Mark Ruffalo side of the character, especially when he becomes the Professor Hulk character later on in Avengers Endgame, that it kind of starts here because Betty even says it's like, well, there's still a little bit of you in there, so what if you work to control it? Edward Norton's Bruce Banner says, I don't want to control this monster, I want to get rid of him. I don't want him to be a part of my life anymore. This is a part of my life that has destroyed my life. I've been on the run from the government because they've wanted to use me. William Hurt, who had been playing Thunderbolt Ross, unfortunately he won't be continuing on with the character because William Hurt passed away a few years ago. Harrison Ford is taking over, so the character still lives on in the MCU and will be appearing in Captain America Brave New World. They're finally picking up on a lot of these threads that were established in The Incredible Hulk. It really wasn't until, outside of the Bruce Banner character, it wasn't until Captain America Civil War that William Hurt came back to play Ross. So he came back finally in Civil War, and then they're finally bringing other characters back. They brought Tim Roth back in the She-Hulk show and the Shang-Chi movie, and they're bringing back Liv Tyler finally as Betty Ross. She's finally making her return in Captain America Brave New World. And Tim Blake Nelson, the leader, they established the creation of the leader here. He's not even returning to the MCU until this year with Captain America Brave New World. So all these things that were set up in The Incredible Hulk, it's like Brave New World is trying to be a sequel to both the Captain America franchise and the Incredible Hulk series. It's so weird, but it's kind of fitting the way those two series are also intertwined because Hulk is a creation of the Super Soldier program. It comes out of that Weapons Plus program that created Steve Rogers and made him Captain America. They were trying to replicate the Super Soldier serum. That's what created the Hulk, and that's what created Abomination. So the two characters of Captain America and Bruce Banner are very much intertwined through the Super Soldier Project Rebirth program. So it's so cool how that is all interconnected, especially with this being a very early days MCU film before Captain America the First Avenger even came out, but how all of that has been intertwined and interconnected. It's so cool the way that that comes together. And I think that's the benefit of the cinematic universe, where sometimes it can hamper things like it had with the production and all the stuff that was going on with Edward Norton. They had to sever ties with him. Kevin Feige didn't want to work with him anymore. A lot of people at Marvel Studios didn't want to work with him anymore. They wanted an actor who was more willing to be collaborative. And that was the thing that they said when they recast Bruce Banner for the Avengers, is that Mark Ruffalo fits more of what they're looking for in an actor, and Edward Norton did not really fit those requirements. While I think Edward Norton did a great job, and I would have loved to have seen his take on the character going forward in the MCU, in the Avengers, I always wonder, what would that look like if Edward Norton was Bruce Banner in the Avengers? Or what would it look like if Mark Ruffalo was the character here in The Incredible Hulk? Does that mean we would have gotten an Incredible Hulk 2 and 3 and 4? Or if Edward Norton had continued, would we have gotten more Hulk films? All because of this and what happened here in recasting the character, and there were weird rights issues between who could distribute the Hulk movies and who could make Hulk movies. It's so weird how all of that came together. And the fact that we got a Hulk movie out of all of this at all is incredible. Unintended, is incredible. So I hope that one day we'll get one. There's rumors of a World War Hulk movie possibly coming down the line at some point. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I hope it does. I hope we get some kind of Hulk movie down the line, and I hope the character of Hulk goes back to this more erratic, Incredible Hulk type of character, not so much the Professor Hulk character. I'm kind of done with that version of the character. He was cool in Endgame, but I was so over that version of the character in She-Hulk, and I just want him to go back to this more uncontrollable rage monster, more so a mix of what we got here in the Incredible Hulk and what we got in the Avengers. Hope they go back to that aspect of the character, but going back to the beginning here, I love the story they're setting here in this. It's a manhunt story. Bruce Banner's a fugitive. It's like kind of the story of The Fugitive starring Harrison Ford. It takes elements of that. He's a guy on the run. He's trying to find his way out of this whole situation and trying to cure himself of the Hulk. That's kind of the crux of this whole plot, is Bruce Banner trying to cure himself and then coming to terms with the fact that at the end of the movie, he has to then use the side of himself that he's not been wanting to use, been trying to push away and force away. So if he can give into this version of himself, maybe they'll work more cohesively with each other. You kind of see that carry on into the Avengers too. to. So the Avengers did a good job of trying to point back to this movie. And although they were different actors playing the character of Bruce Banner, they still tried to keep the two films congruent with one another. Then in the Avengers, the character of Bruce Banner is also kind of dealing with this. Do I keep the Hulk at bay, or do I allow him to be a part of myself and utilize him for good and not be fearful of what he might do to other people? That's an aspect of the character that I love. There's this Jekyll and Hyde side of the character, but there's also this Frankenstein's monster side of the character. That's what Stan Lee was thinking of when he created the character, that there would be this Jekyll and Hyde side of the doctor who turns evil, but the monster is not somebody to be feared, but is actually a hero. It's really interesting the way that they went in the dichotomy of the two sides of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. So I think this movie's actually really good. There's like a whole 3 hours of this movie, I think, that are deleted. There's a lot of subplot that is kind of cut out of here. So there's some issues. We'll get into that in the mixed and negative section of it, where they cut out some scenes that were probably kind of pivotal for this film. Ty Burrell from Modern Family, he plays Doc Samson, Leonard Samson, and he had so much more to do. Even the trailers before the movie was released included him a lot more than what he's actually featured in the film. His character got cut down a lot. It's kind of the nature of the editing, where the final product of the film is kind of a mix of what Edward Norton was trying to do with the film and what Marvel Studios and Universal were trying to do with the film. So there's like this competing nature with what they wanted the movie to be. At the end of the day, I was happy with what the movie was. Other actors, I talked about William Hurt a little bit. I thought he did really great in this. You know, I like Sam Elliott in the role in the Ang Lee Hulk movie, but William Hurt brings another side to this character that I really enjoy, of this guy who's all consumed by his duty, and also kind of what Betty points out in the film, that he's really trying to make up and cover up what happened with the Hulk incident and not really wanting to own up to his failures, and really being faced with that when Hulk throws Abomination's body towards him at the end of the final battle. Ross has to deal with the fact that he created both of these monsters and that he's really the reason why all of this is happening. There's so much intrigue to this character. While he is an antagonist, is he a villain? I don't think he's an outright villain for this movie. He's definitely probably the most antagonistic. I mean, yeah, you got Blonsky and the Abomination, the guy who's driven by greed and power and what kind of creates that monster. But all this was started with Ross and his whole dealings with the Weapon Plus program and trying to recreate Captain America. And it's that thing that Erskine kind of warns us in the first Avenger, that good becomes great, but bad becomes worse. He pushes Blonsky to become the super soldier. And is this a guy who needed to become the super soldier? No, because he has that greed for power, that lust for power, wanting more and more and more, wanting to be this godlike creature that has no place in having these abilities in the first place. I think it's so underrated. Not enough people talk about the levels and the depth of this movie, what it's going for. It's kind of the black sheep of the MCU. Not enough people are talking about it. I wish more people did. Betty Ross, Liv Tyler did a great job as this character. She has this kind of undertone of sadness and regret about what happened with Bruce. The fact that her father has been hunting him down, and she's dealing with the fact that although she loves her father, she also loves Bruce. These men in her life aren't in agreement with one another. She has this great sense of loss and regret. I think she played this role very, very well. And this soft touch she brings to when Bruce turns into the Hulk, and still seeing the humanity in Bruce in spite of the monster that he has become, trying to bring out the fact that he's not really a monster, that although he does become this green rage Hulk, that Bruce Banner is still who this character is at the end of the day. It's not Hulk, it's Bruce Banner, but there are two sides of himself that he has to deal with. Now, there are a few other things I want to get into, but before I go any further with this, I did say Louis Leterrier. I think he's very underrated in what he did here. I love the kind of espionage, fugitive type of film that he created here. I think he established a really interesting tone with this film. Another thing is the composition, the music, the score for this film. There's like this underlying sense of a build-up to the explosion of becoming Hulk. Throughout the score, you can feel this levels of these ebbs and flows of it trying to build up to something and kind of building up to the transformation of Bruce becoming the Hulk. And there is this like hulking out moment in the composition, in the score. It's so cool. And then they put in little hints of the Incredible Hulk TV show theme in there too. There's little bits of that there. So this movie also kind of calls back to that Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Hulk show. So it's nice that they paid homage to what came before. The score is really great. There's a lot of great elements here, but let's go ahead and talk about the mixed section of the Incredible Hulk. The main thing that's mixed is that competing ideas of what the creators of this film wanted and what Edward Norton wanted. He wanted more creative control over this movie, and it's that fighting with the studio and the creators and the director and everybody in between. It's incredible that it did, again, I'm using the word incredible, but it's incredible that it came together as well as it did in the first place. But there are issues here with the fact that this movie should have at least been 2.5 hours, I think. It was cut down way too short. There's a lot of pivotal scenes that were left on the cutting room floor. Thankfully, you can watch the deleted scenes, what this movie was supposed to include, especially with the Leonard Sampson character, Ty Burrell's character. Very underrated. If you watch those scenes, I can understand why you would see him as a forgettable character, because in the theatrical version of this movie, he's really left at the cutting room floor. There's not much of his character in there at all. You kind of forget that he was a character in this at all. You forget that Ty Burrell was even in this movie. But if you go and watch those deleted scenes, there's a lot of great conversation pieces between Ty Burrell's character and Edward Norton's Bruce Banner, and it's so unfortunate that they did that to his character. There's a lot of other stuff here where there's some plot holes, I feel like. Not so much major plot holes in the final product, but I feel like there are just some things that were left missing that should have been included. This movie should have been allowed to breathe, should have been allowed to go deeper into those conversation pieces and not just be this big action film, this action epic. I think they were worried about this movie kind of harkening back to that Ang Lee film where it dived a whole lot more into the character aspect of it, the emotional aspect of it, and not so much into the action. I think they wanted more of an action film than they wanted a character piece. And I think this movie needed to be something a little bit more in between those two things. And it just didn't get the chance to be what I think it could have been at the end of the day. I think if it had really been allowed to be both what Edward Norton wanted, what the studio wanted, kind of meet somewhere in the middle, I think we would have had a much bigger film than what we already have here. Still like the film, I really do. But there are just some issues with those competing ideas for what this movie was supposed to be. Finally, what was bad about The Incredible Hulk? It's the fact that this movie is just forgotten in the midst of all of the MCU. It's very early days MCU. Now, I applaud this movie for being different. I like the different tone. I like that it doesn't fall into the prime formula that they created for the MCU, that it doesn't follow that cookie cutter formula that they established after the Avengers. But I wish that this one was more congruent with the rest of the MCU. I think Brave New World is going to help with that. Civil War helped with having Ross in the film. So there are things that have helped this movie be more part of the MCU, but it still feels like the black sheep of the MCU at the end of the day. It's looked down kind of as a lesser film in the MCU and not so much the great film that I think it is. But as far as bad, it's the circumstances of what made this film be the black sheep of the MCU. All that behind the scenes drama that Edward Norton had with the studio, it just kind of created a bad taste for this movie. And for a while, they didn't even want to show anything related to the Incredible Hulk in marketing for the MCU. They would show a few images of the Hulk here and there, but that was it. Finally, they're kind of acknowledging this movie now. You can watch this movie on Disney Plus as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe experience. So they are kind of acknowledging this movie as being part of their history a little bit more now than they were before. But it's the fact that there was just so much behind the scenes drama with this movie. I think that's the worst part about this whole experience. Final thoughts, guys. I love The Incredible Hulk. I like it a whole lot more than I think a lot of people do. It's actually on the higher side of my rankings of the MCU. It kind of hits more in that top 10, top 15 spot in the MCU. I'll have to do a full ranking later once I've reviewed more of the films in the MCU. But I really like this movie. I actually really appreciate Edward Norton's role as Bruce Banner. I kind of wish he would have gotten a chance to keep going with the character, but I also like Mark Ruffalo in the role. Maybe it would have been interesting to see him in this movie instead. I don't know, but I think this movie just doesn't get enough credit for being a great film, being a great experience. I really like this movie. I love what it's going for in that being a fugitive type film, being a manhunt film, also being this film about dual identity and anger and regret and sorrow, and not just being this comic book superhero film, but there's more to it than that. There's so much more to this film than just being a comic book film, and I don't think enough people have seen that, recognized that, and I wish more people would. While it is kind of the black sheep of the MCU, and while it can be forgotten as being part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Incredible Hulk is worth watching, especially before we go into Captain America Brave New World. I recommend you watch this movie before you even see that movie, because there's so many characters and actors that are returning from The Incredible Hulk. So guys, give this movie a rewatch. It is worth your time. I definitely recommend it. If I'm going to give this movie a rating, it's got to be a 4 out of 5 or a B+ on the letter scale. It's very, very good. It's not great. It's got some problems, but it's so well done. I really enjoy this film, and I always love getting a chance to rewatch it. If you've seen The Incredible Hulk, go down in the comment section. Let me know what you thought of this film. Would you love to see a sequel to The Incredible Hulk, or just another Hulk film in general? I'd love to hear from you. Before you go, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out. I greatly appreciate it. Hope you all have an awesome and a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.